Hello. Story 1. Utilizing an online platform called Connect Market is not something I engaged in frequently. Indeed, it occurred less than once annually, without question. Yet at times, it presented the most straightforward method for selling an item that would otherwise prove impossible to offload swiftly. Nevertheless, subsequent to an event that transpired approximately 3 years ago, I completely discontinued using Connect Market. At that particular time, I was 22 years old and resided in a rather compact dwelling with my housemate for a period exceeding a year before his departure. The lease agreement was scheduled to conclude within a couple of months, regardless, and being without a housemate to apportion the rental expenses, I was no longer in a financial position to sustain residency at the premises. Consequently, it became necessary for me to relocate as well. Discovering an apartment was not exceedingly challenging, though its dimensions were considerably smaller than the house I was vacating. This necessitated that I essentially needed to dispose of nearly all my furnishings. The sofa, in particular, had seen minimal use, and my housemate and I had acquired it just over a year prior when he moved in, rendering it a complete waste to simply discard it on the roadside for someone to retrieve. The item was costly, and I could genuinely utilize any supplementary funds to assist with the moving expenditures, so naturally, I turned to Connect Market. This marked my initial experience selling anything on the website. As I had consistently been the individual purchasing items instead, I had never encountered any peculiar incidents, apart from merely experiencing the somewhat uncomfortable sensation of being within someone else's residence and meeting an unfamiliar individual. However, being the person undertaking the sale, this instance, I experienced a significantly greater sense of ease, since I would be at my own domicile. In any event, it required slightly more than 2 weeks for someone who expressed genuine interest to respond to the advertisement and request to come inspect the item. He ultimately contacted me via telephone to inquire about a few details regarding it. Frankly, this action made me feel better, as I presumed he was likely just endeavoring to be cautious and ensure I was not some sort of disreputable individual. His designation was David, and he informed me that he had recently moved into a new dwelling and required some economically priced furniture to furnish the area. I mentioned that I was in the precise inverse circumstance, relocating from my house to an apartment. He responded by politely asking the reason for my departure, to which I explained that my housemate had left, rendering me unable to reasonably afford the property any longer. He seemed agreeable, though, which I suppose caused me to disclose more information than I perhaps should have. We established a specific time subsequent to both of us finishing work on a Saturday evening, approximately around the hour of 6. When the designated time arrived, I left the forward entrance ajar and awaited his arrival. I remained seated on the sofa for a duration exceeding 60 minutes, simply anticipating the man's appearance before eventually securing the forward entrance and proceeding to the culinary area to prepare some sustenance, assuming he had simply failed to appear. However, the audible signal of the doorbell sounded only moments later. It was 7:30 at this moment, so I was understandably a little vexed, but I endeavored to feign a pleasant expression and unseal the portal. "I am David," he articulated, simultaneously extending his manual appendage for a formal greeting. He was a person of considerable stature and bulk, displaying a conspicuously broad facial expression of delight. I clasped his manual appendage and extended an invitation for him to enter, guiding him into the primary living area. He examined the space momentarily, inclining his cranial structure in affirmation, before I perceived acoustic indicators of perambulation beyond the forward portal. This was succeeded by the aperture opening and the ingress of 2 additional male individuals. My apologies. These individuals are my companions, who are concurrently relocating with me. "I trust this does not inconvenience you," he stated. "Oh, yes, that is acceptable," I responded with a degree of trepidation, being acutely aware that there was little recourse available for me to alter the situation. Honestly, I was commencing to experience a profound sense of disquietude and harbored a disagreeable sensation internally. I attempted to suppress these thoughts, assuring myself I was excessively analyzing the circumstances. But my emotional state would not be subdued. David advanced towards the opposite side of the sofa and slightly descended, as if scrutinizing something minutely. He then reassumed an erect posture. "What is this feature located here?" he questioned, directing his index finger downwards towards the lateral portion of the sofa. With the pair of other male individuals positioned behind me, I hesitantly proceeded towards the location where he was standing and directed my gaze downwards at the sofa. "I fail to perceive anything unusual," I replied. He gestured once more as if encouraging me to adopt a lowered position and inspect closely. The 2 additional men approached, stationing themselves in front of me, while David remained situated behind me. Slowly, I assumed a kneeling posture and examined the side, still discerning nothing out of the ordinary. I could sense the respiration of all of them in close proximity. Only shadows melting into darkness, instilling within me feelings of powerlessness and intense dread. "I am merely engaging in a jest. There is absolutely nothing present," David declared emphatically, delivering a forceful impact upon my dorsal region as I regained an upright position. I emitted a tentative vocalization indicative of amusement and repositioned myself several paces distant. I could discern that the other male individuals displayed unnerving facial expressions as they observed David, as though engaged in collaborative planning. I exerted my utmost effort to maintain composure and devise a strategy for extricating myself from this predicament, but they were present within my private dwelling. I could not simply depart, and I was excessively apprehensive to request their departure. Consequently, "Do you find it satisfactory?" I inquired, attempting to accelerate this transactional process. David directed his gaze towards his associates and subsequently back towards me. His formerly cheerful, expressive countenance had undergone a transformation. There was a distinctly peculiar interval of silence as I fixated upon David's expressionless, ocular organs. It felt like a period of calmness, preceding an impending, tumultuous event. One of the male individuals violently pushed me to the ground, incapacitating me assertively. My immediate reflexive inclination to resist was overcome by his physical capability, and I rapidly ceased resistance, merely hoping to avoid any further infliction of physical harm. David and the remaining male individual traversed the residence, systematically removing all items of pecuniary value, thereby creating disorder and disarray throughout all internal chambers. The male individual positioned atop me continued to maintain a firm hold, pressing my cranial structure against the unyielding wooden flooring with the totality of his mass. After a brief interval of several minutes, David emitted an oral communication from the vicinity of the forward portal, and the individual restraining me disengaged and rapidly exited the dwelling. I perceived the auditory signal of their vehicle accelerating and departing rapidly as I remained prostrate upon the ground in a state of shock, discomfort, and profound fear. Following a period of approximately 2 minutes, I gathered my faculties and cautiously stumbled towards the forward portal to secure and fasten it. I contacted the law enforcement authorities shortly thereafter. To no individual's astonishment, David was not his actual designation, nor was the electronic mail address or telephonic identifier linked to any distinctly identifiable individual. Law enforcement personnel gathered several instances of digital impressions from various locations within the dwelling and documented visual records of their footwear impressions upon the surface. However, the investigative process yielded no further progression, with a complete absence of potential perpetrators. The sole detail they were capable of ascertaining was that the footwear impressions left at my residence were identical to those discovered at the dwelling of another individual several weeks prior during a comparable assault and larceny. That individual was also solitary within their home. It is conjectured that they endeavor to identify individuals who reside alone. So evidently, I inadvertently compromised myself by informing the man about my housemate who had vacated. Irrespective of the circumstances, that encounter has generated a considerable degree of stress and resentment for me. I was misled by the sensation of security derived from being within my own dwelling, and was exploited as a result of this perception. Platforms such as Connect Market inherently possess dangers, and members of the public need to exercise greater vigilance regarding the perils of willingly permitting ingress to individuals who are unknown and appear outwardly innocuous into their private residences. Story 2. I attempted to procure a utilitarian vehicle from Connect Market several years in the past, and before you articulate any commentary, it was available at a highly advantageous cost, and my financial circumstances were not optimal. I had, in fact, never previously utilized Connect Market, but I was aware that it served as a conventional venue for individuals to dispose of their possessions, implying that items were typically reasonably priced, even considering the economical valuations of vehicles on the platform. I was still obliged to solicit monetary assistance from my parental figure because I lacked even the modest sum of several thousand currency units in my financial account that was necessary in liquid funds for an inexpensive vehicle. Subsequent to a period of perusing listings, I communicated electronically with an individual who had posted his utility vehicle for a cost of 4,000 currency units, and he responded quite promptly, addressing all my inquiries concerning it and providing what appeared to be candid responses. Fundamentally, he stated that its external appearance was not exceptionally appealing, but it possessed the capability to transport one to a required destination in a dependable manner. Expressing interest, I agreed to meet him at a Burger King establishment that served as a point equidistant from our respective places of habitation. I reached the location first, utilizing a ride-sharing service, and he arrived approximately 5 minutes later. We engaged in conversational exchange for a brief duration, and he imparted further details regarding the utility vehicle, mentioning minor issues it had presented him with in the past, but nothing of significant severity. After all, I was not in a financial position to be selective. Naturally, I inquired if I might perform a practical evaluation of the vehicle's operation, to which he responded by indicating his awareness of a less frequented vehicular parking area where such an evaluation could be conducted. Frankly, my internal reaction was along the lines of, "All right, whatever," and I retrieved my cellular communication device to arrange a rapid ride-sharing service. But he stated the location was merely situated across the thoroughfare, and that we could simply travel together. I was disinclined to be impolite and had no prior experience with an arrangement of this nature, so I somewhat presumed it was a typical practice. Reflecting in retrospect, I should have unequivocally declined his suggestion. But I was youthful, and he was more advanced in age, so for some inexplicable reason, I placed my trust in him. As I entered the vehicle, he questioned whether I possessed my authorization to operate a motor vehicle, which, incidentally, provided yet another basis upon which I placed my trust in him. He appeared to be a genuinely forthright individual. However, he commenced operating the vehicle, and we proceeded a distance slightly greater than merely across the thoroughfare, likely traversing several city blocks away from the Burger King establishment towards this unoccupied vehicular parking area situated away from the principal arterial route. This constituted the initial warning signal to manifest itself, even though, in hindsight, it arguably should have been the second or third cautionary indicator. "All right, let us exchange positions," he stated, placing the vehicle's transmission mechanism into a non-propulsive mode. As we were in the process of passing each other around the vehicle, he propelled the control implements towards me, verbalizing the phrase, "attention upwards," but they descended nowhere in close proximity to my location. That is to say, I would have been compelled to execute a rapid descent onto the solidified surface material to intercept them. Awkwardly, I proceeded to retrieve them, and precisely as I adopted a bent posture, I perceived the force of his foot striking forcefully against my lateral aspect, and before I fully comprehended the situation, he was positioned atop me, forcefully extracting my portable repository of valuable items from my posterior lower garment pocket and rapidly returning towards the utility vehicle. I instantaneously seized the control implements from the ground, reasoning that he must have inadvertently left them in the intensity of the moment, and that I could potentially enforce an exchange. Regrettably, however, the control implements he had propelled towards me must have been merely counterfeit reproductions, as he simply operated the vehicle away, leaving me marooned at that location in a foolish manner. What exacerbates the entirety of the circumstance is the rapidity with which everything transpired. I was incapable of even ascertaining the identification markings on the vehicle. I still retained possession of my cellular communication device, however, and my immediate course of action was to invalidate the sole financial access card I possessed, as I could not assume the risk of him expending monetary resources I did not possess. Subsequently, I contacted the law enforcement authorities. I returned on foot to the Burger King establishment and formally registered an official report when they met me at that location. However, with only the narrative description of a vehicle described as a rusted white utility vehicle and an individual characterized as an average middle-aged Caucasian male, no progress ever resulted from the investigation. He removed the electronic advertisement, and his electronic mail address was apparently not even associated with a genuine designation. It was merely named subsequent to a digital entertainment character. And again, I failed to obtain his identification markings. Thus, in culmination, I sustained a financial loss of 4,000 currency units in immediate cash funds, was necessitated to await the postal delivery of a replacement financial access card, was required to obtain a new authorization to operate a motor vehicle, and they did not even apprehend the perpetrator. The ethical lesson derived from this narrative is to refrain from utilizing Connect Market and to avoid exhibiting such a lack of prudence as I did. Story 3. I was formerly employed by a substantial manufacturing enterprise, but I discontinued my association subsequent to a former colleague informing me that she was earning a sum exceeding triple her previous remuneration simply by operating autonomously and listing advertisements on the Connect Market marketplace. Therefore, naturally, I conducted investigative research into this possibility and eventually commenced engaging in that activity as well. I was generating exceptional financial compensation for a duration close to 7 months before any atypical incident occurred. Since that time, I have never encountered an individual possessing such an unnerving disposition, and I sincerely hope I shall never do so again. I had responded to a typical electronic correspondence from an individual requesting my services for the sanitization of their residential dwelling. The procedural protocol operates such that they articulate which specific chambers they require me to attend to, and I establish the cost based upon my estimation of the requisite temporal commitment. To execute this, it is necessary for me to physically visit their residence to formulate an estimation. Or they have the alternative of transmitting a visual recording of a guided tour. This methodology was consistent with the procedure employed at my former organizational affiliation, Global Crafts, Inc., except I established a considerably more advantageous rate, and clientele expressed a greater sense of comfort with the same individual attending on a weekly basis. The male client had transmitted a visual recording providing a guided inspection of his residential dwelling, and it appeared exceptionally well maintained initially, which is a frequent occurrence with numerous clients who simply aspire to uphold that level of cleanliness and require someone to address the minute, detailed tasks. We stipulated a particular calendar date and chronological point, and after a few days elapsed, I attended for the initial cleaning service. I was scheduled to be present for approximately 3.5 hours, undertaking tasks on the upper and lower levels, excluding the subterranean area, and dedicating particular attentiveness to the surfaces in the culinary area and the tiled sections in the ablutionary facilities. He welcomed me at the entrance and guided me to the upper level so that I might proceed with my work downwards, and it was at this juncture that everything initiated a problematic turn. I commenced the sanitization tasks, anticipating his departure, but he somewhat remained situated in the immediate vicinity, observing my activities, which occasionally occurs with elderly female clients who exhibit a controlling disposition. However, this male individual was not directing his observation towards the areas I was cleaning. He was directing his visual attention towards me. I inquired if he desired me to execute any supplementary tasks, and he simply remained stationary for a moment. "You are aware, when I encountered your advertisement on Connect Market, I recognized I was compelled to have you," he stated. Initially, I did not interpret this statement in any manner suggestive of flirtatious intent. I simply perceived this as an older Caucasian male remarking to me, a woman of Mexican heritage, that I was inherently suited to be proficient at cleaning. I did not genuinely concern myself with the comment. I have frequently heard such remarks. They typically vocalize observations stemming from a lack of awareness. However, I desired the financial compensation, so I maintained my silence and offered a fabricated response. "Oh, well, I extend my gratitude," I replied. "I usually request that individuals remain outside of the specific room. However, it simply facilitates the cleaning process more effectively in that manner." He articulated his agreement, stating no problem, but it was distinctly evident that there was indeed a problem. This was because, while he did depart from that specific chamber, He proceeded to the chamber situated directly across the corridor, seated himself upon the sleeping surface, and continued to observe me from that location. At this point, I was beginning to experience a profound sense of unease, and the prospect of him observing me for a duration of 3.5 hours was profoundly unsettling. I formulated an idea, and subsequent to completing the task of removing superficial particulate matter, I initiated the operation of the floor cleaning apparatus, navigating behind the portal so that I could reposition it, leaving it only slightly ajar. This ensured that, for the remainder of my activities within this specific chamber at the very least, he would be incapable of visually observing me. My immediate objective was merely to successfully navigate through this day, receive compensation for my services, and never again return to this location. I transitioned to the ablutionary facility that was functionally connected to the chamber. I had been engaged in the activity for approximately 20 minutes, actively scrubbing the grouting material, when I again perceived the sensation of being visually scrutinized. I turned around, and as anticipated, he was present within the portal opening. "Apologies for causing disturbance," he began. "I neglected to instruct you to leave the ornamental table unchanged. It belonged to my marital partner. She passed away years ago, in the year 2009. It has been exceptionally challenging navigating through all that. Consequently, I wish to preserve its condition." I responded affirmatively, stating "okay," and following a moment of silence and awkward mutual observation, he ultimately departed. I contemplated why he had not simply included specific directions not to attend to the principal ablutionary facility's ornamental table if its preservation held such significance. However, as I was performing cleaning tasks in the vicinity of it, I noted the presence of some cosmetic substances on the counter surface that I was aware had only become available for purchase a few years prior. This observation occurred in the year 2017, and he had stated his marital partner expired in the year 2009. Yet, the cosmetic substances situated upon the counter surface included several articles that were released commercially no earlier than the year 2015, and I possessed this knowledge because I had been enthusiastic upon their market introduction. Furthermore, for whatever significance it may hold, if this ornamental table had genuinely been preserved over time, its condition would have appeared considerably more deteriorated. If I had not felt a sense of suspicion before, I most certainly did now. Thankfully, for the remaining period of my occupancy on the upper level, he did not visually observe me or engage in verbal communication with me. I was anticipating with dread the necessity of descending to the lower level, but I had completed half of the required tasks and merely needed to finish the remaining portion. I reached the culinary area and commenced my activities there. From the culinary area, one could perceive the principal living area, and once more, something felt inconsistent. This male individual had absolutely no visual representations affixed to the vertical surfaces. I have undertaken the sanitization of a multitude of residential properties, numbering in the hundreds at this point, and I have never encountered a dwelling entirely devoid of visual representations. Even individuals who resided alone possessed at least seasonal greeting cards from the familial units of others affixed to their refrigeration unit. I am uncertain why this detail profoundly unnerved me, but it did. And precisely at the moment, I resolved to merely complete the residual tasks with exceptional rapidity and reduce some of the financial obligation for him, he materialized within the architectural opening and inquired if I could perform a benevolent act for him. I hesitantly questioned what this might entail, to which he responded by stating he was aware that it specifically indicated no inclusion of the subterranean level. But he had forgotten he was anticipating visitors the subsequent week. He explained that this area was where the recreational table and associated items were situated, and he merely desired a prompt, superficial cleaning of the floor surface. I informed him I was adhering to a very stringent schedule and was uncertain if I could accommodate the request on this particular day, but perhaps during a subsequent visit. He then suggested I could omit the dining chamber, as it was never actively utilized, and instead focus on the floor surfaces in the subterranean area. I responded by elaborating that I could return the following day and attend to the entirety of the subterranean area instead of solely the floor surfaces, if he desired. I was merely attempting to defer the matter somewhat. However, it was at this juncture that his entire disposition underwent a fundamental transformation. He commenced exhibiting markedly peculiar behavior and stated that he merely required the floor surface to be addressed and could not comprehend why I would not simply execute the task on that very day. He continued by asserting that he and his marital partner genuinely required the floor surfaces addressed in that lower region. His marital partner, the individual who had purportedly expired years previously. That was the precise instant I fully recognized that this male individual was unequivocally attempting to orchestrate something profoundly dreadful, although I remained uncertain of the specific nature of his intentions. I tentatively stated that if I had available time, I would undertake the task. "Well, may I simply visually demonstrate to you what necessitates completion in that lower area?" he pressed. "It will not require extended duration, genuinely very quickly." Recognizing his persistent nature, I simulated receiving a telephonic communication and withdrew to an alternative chamber. I then initiated a call to my associate to articulate the situation that was unfolding. He was still vigilantly observing me, so I communicated in the Spanish language, fervently hoping he possessed no comprehension of it. She acceded to drive to this specified location and ensure that upon my departure, he did not attempt to pursue me or, even worse, take any other action. I concluded the telephonic exchange and informed him that I was compelled to depart due to a familial emergency and could return on the subsequent day to finalize all tasks, which was, understandably, an untruthful statement. He directed a gaze of utmost frigidity towards me, and retorted, "Do not trouble yourself with returning." He then ascended to the upper level while I proceeded to gather my belongings. I was acutely aware that I would not receive monetary compensation, but at this precise moment, I simply considered myself fortunate to be departing. My associate arrived while I was engaged in depositing my items into the rear storage compartment of my vehicle, and the male individual was continuously fixated upon me through the transparent barrier for the entirety of that period. I departed the location, and upon reaching my own residence, I contacted the law enforcement authorities to report the events that had transpired. However, there was limited action they could undertake, as he had not committed an infringement of codified law. He was merely exhibiting peculiar conduct. They fundamentally reiterated the obvious, advising me to refrain from returning to that location, which was an intention I clearly already harbored. Consider this a cautionary reminder for every individual. If you render a professional service through online platforms such as Connect Market, there exists no definitive method to ascertain who is genuinely peculiar and who is not. Consequently, ensure you have faith in your intuitive judgment and invariably inform another person of the specific location you are attending and the expected time of your departure, merely as a precautionary measure. I remain unaware of what underlying issue affected that male individual, or what he had devised for me within that subterranean area. But I sincerely hope that no other person is compelled to discover the answer. Bye.